There are numerous ways that you can see Machu Picchu. There are tours that you can do that will take you walking up and down Inca steps, going through the Sun Gate. There's even a railway journey you can do to get to Aguas Calientes, which is the principal town at the bottom of the hill that has Machu Picchu. Or you can do what we done and do the cheap alternative, where you get a collectivo to the end of a railway line somewhere. You then walk along the railway line and you then stay at Aguas Calientes. You get up in the morning, you trek up to the steps, you trek up to Machu Picchu, you do a guided tour, you then go down the steps or get a bus, walk back along the railway tracks, and then get a collectivo back to Cusco. Now, being on a budget, we decided to go down that route. The Peruvian train, way too expensive for our liking. I think even nowadays it's still something I would balk at as well. So we went for the cheap option. We'd already booked it in anyway, using the same guy that we'd seen the Moray Circles and the other sites with. Now, this whole episode could be dedicated to Machu Picchu itself, but in fact the journey getting to Machu Picchu, or even Aguas Calientes in general, was quite an achievement. There's a 6 or 7 hour collectivo journey to a railway site, basically in the middle of the hills. From there we disembarked, and from there it was a simple case of walking the railway. Now, the great thing about walking the railway was that you were pretty much left alone on the tracks. You wouldn't get that anywhere else, I don't think, nowadays. But you also were surrounded by these crisp green valleys. And also, again, it's that river, it's the Urubamba. You're walking alongside the Urubamba River as well. Now, we were told as a very little tease, we were told that if you look hard enough, when you walk in from where we started to Aguas Calientes, that you could see Machu Picchu, if you're lucky. We kept looking, we had absolutely no idea. We were, spoiler alert, we did not see it walking all the way to Aguas Calientes. But the train journey was cool. At some point, I must admit, we weren't expecting the train to go past, but we did hear a honk of the horn and had to quickly jump off the rails in order to not be run over by the train. But that was a very pleasant journey. It was a wonderfully hot day. You're surrounded by all these forests, these hills, the river, the railway. Perfect. It reminds me of, I think it was Stand By Me, the film in the 80s, where they're sort of along the rail tracks and bits and pieces like that. It just reminded me a little bit of that. Got into Aguas Calientes. We stayed at a little hostel there. Wasn't anything to shout home about. The one thing that we were not looking forward to the following day was having to be woken up at 4:30 in order to get to the bottom of the steps, in order to get to the bottom of the Inca steps for, I believe it was 5 o'clock in the morning. We had to be at the Garadera Hiram Bingham at about 5 o'clock in the morning. Hiram Bingham being the person that is known for finding Machu Picchu. Very groggy start early in the morning. We'd only taken the basic things that we needed in our backpack. We headed down to the bridge with a hell of a lot of people there as well. It started raining, which made the steps extra slippery, which didn't quite help. And it was a good job that we'd already been to Ollantaytambo, because we'd experienced the size of Inca steps. You're not talking about your regular staircases that you and I would find nowadays. You're talking about massive blocks of stone, and really, you're almost lifting your knees over your head to move up to the next step. There's about 400, 500 steps, I believe, in order to get to the top. It took about an hour, if memory serves correctly. It took about an hour to get to the top. And we were there for about 6 o'clock in the morning. We then met up with our tour guide. And to our absolute horror, it was misty, it was foggy. You could not see anything. You had absolutely no idea really where you were. The first thing the tour guide said to us in Machu Picchu at the entrance, the first thing he said, do not worry about the fog. I guarantee to you it will clear up in a couple of hours. This fog was incredibly dense. Now, we took his word for it. I think we were all thinking, you're talking a lot of crap, mate, but it's your full-time job. We will take your word for it. And that's what we did. We took the guy's word for it. The first hour and a half, we were taken into Machu Picchu itself. We've gone through the entrance, still can't see anything. And he sat us down on, I think it was a set of stone steps. And he was going through the history of the site. How it appeared, how it's there, why it's there, was it used as a secret hideaway for the old Inca leaders when the Spanish arrived, why was it built, was it a royal residence? There's a multitude of things that Machu Picchu could be there for. I'm not going to go into all of them in this podcast, just Wikipedia it. You'll come to your own conclusions, I think, in due course. And it got to about 7:30. The fog is still there. Doesn't look very pleasant at all. It's drizzling a little bit too, so everyone's getting, that's that really fine, annoying rain. So everyone's getting a little bit wet, everyone's getting a bit cheesed off. Out of nowhere, we're growing a little bit impatient, the group's getting a little bit impatient, even the tour guide's getting a little bit impatient. Out of nowhere, the fog starts to lift. In the background, you can see the fog getting lighter because you can see that the sun is trying its very best to peer through. 5 minutes later, the clouds are gone, the mist is gone, the fog gone. We were left with sun, but the magical thing was what appeared directly in front of all of our eyes. There it was, Machu Picchu in its finest glory you can imagine. The sun beating off the stone, shining a light down onto this exquisite royal village nestled high up in the mountains of Peru. I know that we say there's going to be times in life where you just don't forget those moments. This is one of those moments. What greeted us when the fog had gone was, I can only describe it as 10 out of 10. There's no words that I can describe or use that will do the site justice. The guided tour for the rest of the day was wonderful. The guide took us around all the various buildings that we could think of. He was showing us, again, the stonework. We saw the Plaza Principal, the Cementerio. We also saw terrace farming that was going straight down onto the hills, into the valley, which was nuts, to say the least. You take a wrong step off of that terrace farm, you're toast. You're going to be a few thousand feet below, lying in the river Urubamba. We also saw the Temple of the Three Windows. We also saw Huayna Picchu, which is an even higher bit, just at the end of Machu Picchu. We did have the option to possibly walk that, but we decided against it, given the fact that it had been raining that morning. Huayna Picchu is famous, because that is where the Templo de la Luna at Machu Picchu, the Temple of the Moon, is. And the guide also pointed out to us various aspects of the Sun Gate and the famous Inca steps and the Inca trail that you could go down in order to get to Machu Picchu. And this is how the Incas would have probably done it back in the day. There was loads of alpacas, a few llamas lying around as well. They look quite happy to be there. We also learned a lot about their fascination with the sun in the El Templo del Sol, the Sun Temple. The Incas, and we found out to a later date, the Aztecs, Maya, etc., had this, not fascination with the sun as such, but this, maybe fascination is the right word, but the astrology that they were able to create, to come out with, based on the sun, its positioning, etc., was just ridiculously awesome. I'm going to take back what I just said about fascination. I think fascination is the right word, because I think the Incans did have a sun god. So yeah, ignore what I just said about fascination. But in short, Machu Picchu, the whole site was phenomenal. Is it one of the best things I've ever seen in my life? It's up there. I wouldn't say it is hands down the best. I think what really helps its cause is the location. It is nestled in the hill, in the middle of nowhere, pretty much. and it is an extraordinary sight to say the least. We also made sure to look over to the valley to understand where we could possibly see Machu Picchu on the way back. We made it our mission, we made it our aim on the way back to try and see the slopes of Machu Picchu from the valley itself. It was just after lunch. We knew that we still had an 8 to 10 kilometre walk back along the railway tracks. We knew that we had to be back at the pickup point pretty much at about 6 o'clock, I think it was. That's what we needed to do. So that's what we done. We, rather than walk down the steps, again, it had been raining, we decided to be a little bit lazy and we took the bus down. But also by doing that, it allowed us more time at Machu Picchu itself. Could have stayed there all day, really. It was just that mind-boggling a sight. The trip along the tracks on the way back was entertaining. It was a lot of the time, it was a case of 1 foot in front of the other. When you've been walking a long time, it's just 1 foot in front of the other. You're not thinking too much. It's just you're tired. You're cracking on with it. We did manage to see Machu Picchu from the Urubamba River and the railway lines. We looked up. We knew where we were meant to look up. You're not able to see all of it, of course, but we could definitely make out the slopes. We could definitely make out, where the site was, because we saw some of the terrace farming and we saw a couple of the stone structures as well. Possibly the Templo de las Tres Ventanas, Temple of the Three Windows. I believe that's right on the edge of the site as well. In typical Peruvian fashion, we got back to the checkpoint where we were meant to be picked up after nearly being run over by a train again. And it was a bit madness down at the site. The minibus didn't even turn up for another hour, which annoyed us because we could have spent another hour moping along the tracks, or at least up in Machu Picchu. And the journey back was long, winding. It was tiresome. The great advantage of the journey back, the bus journey between Cusco and where we were picked up, is the scenery was absolutely divine. Again, it was almost like Death Road style. You were quite high up. It was a gravelly, stony road. There was hardly any crash barriers or anything like that. So if something happened with the driver, everyone was dead. Pretty much, you'd be flying off that cliff before you know it. I decided to sit next to the window on the way back to allow Aaron not to look out the window for his own sanity. I'm not being a big fan of heights. It's probably the best night's sleep I've ever had. That night, getting back to Cusco, bear in mind, we'd been up since about 4:30. I think we got back about 10 o'clock. And, our time in Cusco had come to an end. We'd seen a hell of a lot of Inca things. We are grateful that we'd seen the Morays, the Ollanta Tambo, Machu Picchu itself. We saw Huayna Picchu. We've done a lot of, learning, a lot of fun things in and around the city. But when we got back, the journey for both of us, the journey would end there. Reason being that Aaron was called back home for what turned out in the end to be a family bereavement. He made the decision to fly back home. That possibly would have been that evening, or it might have been the following morning, very early in the morning, when we'd got up. He made the decision to fly back to England. So therefore, I'd be on my own for a few weeks' time. I'd have no real idea of where I needed to go. I tell a lie, we did have a bus journey booked in from Lima up to Colombia. So we agreed that we'd meet again in a few weeks' time. We agreed that we would meet in the wonderful city of Cartagena, up in the north coast of Colombia. That's where we'd meet. Aaron flew off, and then for me, it was deciding what to do next. Join us next week where I head off into the butt end of Peru. Hasta luego.